Hi, I'm Anna Hoffman, and welcome to Data Exposed Live. We are super excited to have you all here today, and we have an exciting roundup of guests to bring you the latest Azure SQL news. As always, we are streaming on Learn TV as well as other platforms, so if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat wherever you're streaming from. But we recommend going to Learn TV. This is our 24-hour types of news channel bringing you the latest anything related to Microsoft so you can learn that way. Now, today we are doing our live news update for May 2021, and you can see we have some great guests on the show today, all I think with, or almost all of them with demos, and I have some demos, and we've got a lot of news. As you may have noticed, we move at the speed of the cloud. So we're always updating, always innovating, always blogging, which sometimes makes it hard to keep up. And this episode is really meant to help you stay up to date and find out what you want to learn more about. As always, anything you see today will be published or should be published now in the news update blog. That should have gone live just when we went live with the show. So you can always get all the references today. All the links that are mentioned are going to be summarized in that blog post. Now, without further ado, I want to go ahead and get started talking about some product updates. Now, I don't have a ton of big product updates for today. I really have two, and then we're going to bring on a special guest to talk about some of the other ones. But the first product update is for Azure SQL Managed Instance. And this update is around service-aided subnet configuration. And this is going to now allow users and customers to make use of service tags for user-defined routes. Now, what this is basically going to do is basically add you the ability to add network subnet delegation to certain service tags. So, for example, if you wanted to have inbound and outbound access to a storage account, you could instead use the storage account.westus, or it's some nomenclature like that, which allows you to just enable those as opposed to going in and having to add every single firewall rule or all the different connectivities to that virtual network. So this is a big one. This is one that's been asked for a lot by customers. So definitely one I recommend you checking out. Now, the next one came into public preview. This was the announcement of geo-replication for Azure SQL Database Hyperscale. Now, just a brief recap, Azure SQL Database Hyperscale is only available in Azure SQL Database, not in Azure SQL Managed Instance. Before the Hyperscale tier, we had both the, we had general purpose and business critical. Now, this Hyperscale tier is really interesting because we essentially re-architected SQL Server to be a cloud-native solution. So this means we can scale up to 100 terabytes, and in theory, that's just a number. There's nothing stopping us, no hardware limitations stop us from going higher than that. All that being said, we've still been working on and adding all of the features that you get in Azure SQL Database today. So this geo-replication capability is just one more reason or one more way we're kind of closing the parity gap between the hyperscale service tier and the other service tiers. And I wanted to take a look and see how easy this actually was and if it really compared to geo-replication in the other service tiers. So I just have this quick demo I wanted to show you all. So this is an application I have. It's a fitness tracking app. Maybe you've seen me demo it before. It was a while ago, but basically this is a hyperscale database, and you can see it's currently, almost 13 terabytes in size. And so this is above any limit that any other deployment option or service tier of Azure SQL Platform as a Service can handle. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, what I wanted to show you is down on the left, you can see in preview, we now have this geo-replication tab. So if we click into geo-replication, what you're going to see when this loads is a list of all the different regions that I could replicate this database to. You can also see that I've gone ahead and created another server, FitApp Server 2, and replicated this database to South Central US. Now, this becomes a readable secondary, and I could add other ones if I wanted here. We're still working on some of the things, and that's why this is in public preview, but you can go ahead and try this out today. one thing to keep in mind is that the initial seeding of this secondary database is a size of data operation. So it does take some time to move this 13 terabyte database and replicate it over, bring the data over. But something cool to check out and learn more about. This is in public preview, and again, there'll be more information on what exactly is and is not included in this preview for georeplication. Now, this next announcement is actually pretty exciting. I'm going to bring up Alexandra, who is a program manager on the Azure SQL team. Alexandra, thanks so much for joining us today. I believe you're going to talk about Oracle migrations, and really I'm just going to pass it over to you and learn.
Awesome, Anna. Thank you very much. First of all, thanks for having me. I'm a program manager in Azure Data. I'm looking over heterogeneous database migration. Basically, I'm looking over SQL Server Migration Assistant. In the SQL Server or under the SQL Server Migration Assistant umbrella, we have actually 5 tools helping customers modernize their database workloads from DB2, Oracle, MySQL, Sybase, and Access to Azure SQL and SQL on-prem. Well, the tool has a little bit of background on the market. It has been there for the last 3 years at least, and we have invested a lot in developing new feature. But we've just released version 8.19. And what's really cool and new about this release is that we have enabled a new feature. Before going deeper into the details and what we have done for the tester in SSMA, I just want to let you know that we have documented all the changes, all the small improvements, all the system columns that we have enabled in our SSMA What's New article. So Anna has on her blog the links for each and every tool, documenting everything that we've changed in each and every release. And now let's go to the coolest part of this release, which is the SSMA tester. The tester itself has been on the market for a while, but it had 2 major limitations. One was related to the fact that it was available just for SQL on-prem targets. And the second one was related to the fact that you had to deploy some extensions pack on the SQL side in order to run the validation. Well, with 8.19, we removed all of those blockers. So now the tester is available for Azure SQL DB and SQL MI, and also you don't need to install any extension pack. All the logic behind has been moved on the client side. So what can you actually test? And why do we call it tester? It's basically a component that you can use post-migration to see if the data matches, if the data is identical at table level, store procedure level, function level, view, and also standalone statement level. So you have a lot of flexibility in configuring your test cases, and we cover all major objects. How do we actually validate? What is the validation criteria that we are looking at? Well, we are not just looking at the data value itself. That's the basic part that we do for tables. We are also looking at the parameter values. We are looking at the result set. If you have a store procedure or if you have a function that you would like to execute, we look at the values of those parameters as well as the output of the result set. But what if a store procedure will actually change data on your table? Well, we've got that covered for you as well. If you want to execute a store procedure or validate a function that actually changes data in your table, within the tester, you can use the backup functionality to back up your table or tables before executing or confirming the validation scenario. This will guarantee that post-validation, you will be able to restore the previous state of your table. And since I think a picture is more important than words, I'm just going to walk you through a very basic test case that you can configure. So for people who haven't seen the tool before, this is SQL Server Migration Assistant interface. I'm running the Oracle to SQL version, and today we're just going to look at the tester tab here. Right now I'm connected to an Azure SQL DB, so I'm not cheating. I'm not connecting to SQL on-prem, and I haven't installed any extension pack. So what do we need to do? First, we need to create a test case. Well, the first thing you need to do is provide a name for your test case. So I'm just going to say live demo. Hope it works well. Go. So that's my test case. Now I'm just going to have to choose the objects that I want to validate. Today, I'm just going to look at the tables, but in the following weeks, we are going to release an episode that would walk you through the entire process of validating functions, procedures, and also backing up and restore your tables. So stay tuned for that. For today, I'm just going to choose the countries table. I'm going to choose next. Here, I don't have any affiliated objects. It's just a simple table. I don't have any other dependent objects for this table. And the next step is going to be a validation of the object that I've chosen, which is HR. It's HR schemas countries table. Just going to go for the next steps. And once I am done, I'm going to click finish. Now, finish is going to take me to an interface where I see all the test cases. It's not a run, it's just configured. You can edit, you can remove it, you can do whatever you want, and you can also invoke previous test cases if you wish to. Today, I'm just going to run this test case, and I'm going to press the run button. It requires reconnection to your source and target. So here I'm reconnecting to my Oracle server, and then I'm gonna reconnect to my Azure SQL DB. It's always fingers crossed with a live demo, and I'm very lucky with live demos as well. And right now we are doing the validation for table HR countries. It's pretty fast. It's not a big table. And I can also have a look at the report. So here in the details, I have the table comparison result, and I see the results that are fully equal. This is really a basic test that we can do. The tester component itself is much more powerful, and stay tuned for the next episode where we are gonna walk you through the procedures and also backup and restore. And please download SSMA 8.19 and share your feedback with us.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Alexandra. And I just want to stress, like, SSMA is such a cool tool. Like, I had never seen it before a few weeks ago when we started recording these episodes that Alexandra's talking about. So you're definitely going to want to go check out the references that will be in my blog, everything Alexandra talked about. And then make sure you subscribe to Data Exposed, because we have recorded a bunch of episodes around migration and assessment and seeing some of the cool things that you can do with SSMA. So thanks so much, Alexandra. We're looking forward to releasing your episodes in the future.
Awesome. And there's also another cool thing that I forgot to mention is the fact that these reports, these validation test cases are stored locally on your disk. So if you have other migration projects, just copy that folder from one migration project to the other. It's that easy.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thanks so much again, Alexandra. Always great to have you on the show, and we are going to move right along. So our next segment is kind of something new for Data Exposed. We're going to be talking about Citus and open source, and this is something I really don't know that much about. So I'm going to bring up Claire. Claire, thanks so much for joining us today. Since we haven't had anyone from your team on the show before, I would love if you could give us a brief overview about what you do and what your team is.
I am happy to do that. Thank you so much for having me here today, Anna. So I work on the Postgres team at Microsoft, and specifically on the Citus team. And on the Postgres team, we operate a managed service on Azure that many of your viewers have probably heard of, Azure Database for Postgres. And it has a few different deployment options. And one of them is Hyperscale Citus, which is based on the Citus extension to Postgres, which is open source. I'm showing a screenshot right now of our GitHub repo. If after this session, any of you are curious, want to go see what's going on, there's a lot of activity on this repo. And I put a short form URL on the screen right now, aka.ms/Citus, that you can use to go see what's happening. But what Citus does is it distributes your database across multiple nodes. That's the claim to fame. And it does that as an extension, not a fork. And so when you're using Citus, when you're using Hyperscale Citus, you're also using Postgres under the covers as well. So it's not something that gets out of date. It stays consistent with the latest releases. And it's as simple as creating a distributed table. And then we don't just distribute your tables across multiple nodes. We transform your queries and we distribute the queries across multiple nodes as well. So you get all the performance benefits of parallelism. Now, the reason I'm here today is people are pretty excited about the latest Citus 10 open source release. And so this is our release graphic showing on the screen right now. We create new graphics for each open source release. And of course, there's always an elephant, because that's, of course, the mascot for the Postgres open source database. And there is a blog post online that if after this you want to go read more, learn more, it's the definitive post written by the technical lead for the Citus open source project, Marco Slot. And I put another one of those short URLs on the screen to make it easy to get to. But I'm going to quickly, in the time I have allowed, try to tell you about the 4 big exciting things that are in the Citus 10 open source release. And the first is that you can now shard Postgres. You can now use Citus on a single node. And in the context of Azure, in the context of Hyperscale Citus, that's referred to as basic tier, and it's available in preview right now on Azure Database for Postgres. And so what that means is you can use and adopt a distributed data model from the very beginning. So that can be useful for just trying it out, right? It's just easier to try Citus. But also, if you've got an application that doesn't need the scale of a multiple node cluster, but you know you're going to grow to that level, by adopting the distributed data model from the very beginning, you make it so much easier when it's time to scale out later, because then you just add nodes, rebalance your shards, and you're off to the races. I hope I'm not making that seem too simple. Obviously, data is important, and there's a lot of thought that goes into these transitions. So like I said, it makes it easier to get started. And this is a screenshot of the Azure portal in the provisioning workflow for Azure Database for Postgres. And you can now see that in preview, there's a basic tier option as well as the standard tier. And that starts at like 27 cents an hour. I think that's a US East price. And so it makes it super easy to just try things out for a couple of hours. Whereas before you would have had to provision multiple nodes, and obviously it would have been more than 27 cents an hour. It also makes it easier to just try things out with Citus open source. So there's a single Docker run command that you can now run to just kick the tires and get started with Citus. And I put a short URL on the screen to get to our download page where you can, download packages in whatever flavor operating system and or get access to the instructions in the single Docker run command. And then the other big thing that people are excited about is columnar compression. Now, columnar databases have been around for a long time. There are many of them. I'm sure most of you are familiar with them. But what's new here is the fact that you can now use columnar tables with Postgres, with Citus open source, and in combination with row-based tables as well. And we created a new syntax in Citus called using columnar that you can use to create columnar tables. And I'm just putting a screenshot here of a video that Jeff Davis, one of the technical architects for this project, he's also a Postgres committer, he created. And this video is short, not so long. It's about 14 minutes long, and it's on the Microsoft Developer channel. You can find it there on YouTube. And he does a really good job giving a demo of this. But what I think is interesting is that you can also take your tables or your partitions and convert them from heap to columnar or columnar to heap. So you can kind of go back and forth. And so if you think about using something like columnar along with Postgres native range partitioning, you can imagine that over time you might have these older partitions in a table that all get compressed. And by compressing, you're using a lot less disk space, you're reducing your IOPS, you're improving your performance, you're improving your vacuum performance, but your newest partition can still be hot. It can still get lots of updates. It can still be row-based. So people are pretty excited about it. And in fact, the first day it rolled out, we got this comment from a user who said that he shrunk his append-only table down from 80 gig to 6 gig. And he was just super, super excited. And this was, just within hours of posting the blog post. So we were pretty pleased with that. The fourth thing that I want to flag is that the shard rebalancer, which has been part of Citus for a long time and is of course available in our Azure Managed Postgres service, we open sourced it as well. And so people are pretty excited about it. And shard rebalancing basically is about making sure that these shards, these small Postgres tables, are balanced properly across the nodes in your cluster. So you can imagine on the left, you add a new node, it doesn't have any data on it. So you need to kind of rebalance things to make your performance optimal. So that's all I've got for you. I hope I didn't go too fast. We do have a monthly technical newsletter, which shares links not just about Citus and new blog posts written by our engineers, but also about Postgres and Azure Postgres. And people seem to really like it. We've got about 12,000 subscribers. And if this is an area you're interested in, aka.ms/Citus-newsletter, please sign up and enjoy. Thank you, Anna.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Claire. That was really an awesome session. I did just want to throw up one comment we got on Twitch is people really think the new logo is pretty cool for the Citus 10 release. So hopefully that encourages more people to go check it out. We don't have an animal logo for Azure SQL, but maybe it's something we should consider.
Well, I'm sure our designer, Isaac, will be thrilled to hear that. And we'll have to wait and see what the release graphic will be for 10.1.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Claire.
Thank you.
All right. So that was awesome. We haven't done a lot of open source stuff, so maybe we'll start adding some stuff to the show if you guys want to learn more about what we're doing in the realm of open source databases. So now moving right along, we're going to talk about blogs and videos. As you know, if you try to keep up with any of our blogs, there's about 18,000 of them. I'm exaggerating. There's about 5 or 6 blogs, and we're always posting different updates, different tips and tricks. So I just like to take some time to go through some of them, show you some things I learned. I actually go through and read all of them and try to figure out what you all might be interested in. So yeah, let's start with the Azure blog. And I do want to say that I only pull a selection from here because there are a lot of blogs that go up on the Azure All Up blog that aren't necessarily relevant to a data person. So with that being said, these are the few that I thought were interesting. The first is the Azure Cost Management and Billing updates. This isn't explicitly related to Azure data, but I found it really interesting because basically it's going to give you real examples of how Azure is constantly working to improve not only your experience when it comes to reviewing costs, but also how we're kind of doing everything that we can to save costs and help you only pay for what you actually need and use. So it's pretty cool, maybe counterintuitive to what you think something like Azure would do, but really we want you to save costs so that you stay with us and that you're happy and that sort of thing. So that's a great one to check out just to see how much we're investing as a platform and an organization and a company into helping you manage your costs. The next thing I wanted to mention is these new VM series that came out in preview. Now, again, this is going to be relevant potentially to customers using SQL Server and Azure VM, or if you're just using Azure VMs for other things. Some of these new VMs are really were announced as part of the upcoming preview of Azure Confidential Computing. So you're gonna wanna check into these. Some of them are mid-size VMs for memory-intensive operations. And then the other one is for business-critical applications. So for things like in-memory analytics and that sort of thing. So maybe not related directly to Azure SQL, but could be relevant to some of the other projects that you're working on in Azure. Now, another one I wanted to mention is this one by JG. He released a blog about how Microsoft is teaming up with Coursera, which is an online learning platform. And we're basically using this to introduce new courses around Azure specialization. So maybe you're familiar with Microsoft Learn, where we do a lot of this stuff for free online, but we're also partnering with Coursera to help you get certified in things like Azure Fundamentals, AZ900, in things like Azure Data Engineer, or even things like the DP300, which is the Managing Relational Databases in Azure exam. So you can just see how we're trying to help here. And one of the things that I found really interesting from this article, whoops, didn't mean to go to the next slide. Let's go back. But one of the things I found really interesting about this article is that a study that they reference says that 150 million new tech jobs will be created in the next year or 5 years. I think it was 5 years. I'm trying to check my notes. In the next 5 years. So that's a lot of tech jobs. So we're going to do everything we can to make sure you're skilled up and you're prepared for this increasingly tech-heavy world that we're headed towards. Okay, the last one is kind of a fun one. It's this thing called Azure Trivia, and this blog basically talks about how it's back and better than ever. Now, I was not someone familiar with Azure Trivia before, so for me back, I was like, what is this? So I actually went and explored it. Let me hop back to my browser. So what you're seeing here is this tweet for this week. So basically every week, I think on Monday, they're announcing a new trivia question. And you can see I already played, so I already tried to answer this question. You basically tweet your answer, and then you're entered into a sweepstakes to get things like an IoT set and some other cool prizes. So this is a cool way to just kind of engage and quiz yourself and you know, get involved on Twitter. I think a lot of our community is on Twitter, and so it's cool that we're kind of running prizes through Twitter. Maybe one day Data Exposed can run something like that. Speaking of Data Exposed, I want to talk about all the great episodes we've released this month. You know us here at Data Exposed, we're trying to stay up to date, trying to release everything we can. And we released a bunch of episodes in the past month. You can see Kate Smith came on most recently to talk about intelligent query processing. This was just a chat. So we just sat down, we chatted about IQP, what it means, how it's useful, and how it relates to Azure SQL. It was really an interesting conversation. I learned a lot, and so you might consider checking it out. Our MVP edition, so for those of you that aren't aware, every month we do one MVP episode, which is an episode with a member of the Microsoft Most Valuable Professionals community. This month it was on Storage 101. This was really interesting because a lot of times as an Azure SQL person or a database person, you don't necessarily think about the storage underneath, but it's definitely really important and relevant to understand how these packets and how these blocks are moving across the network and how that's going to impact your workloads. We also talked about parameterizing notebooks in Azure Data Studio with Aaron Nelson. This was really cool. You can basically run a notebook and supply parameters. So that's a great one. Amit came on to talk about Helm charts to deploy SQL Server 2019 on Kubernetes. Now, this is not something I was super familiar with, so it was really cool to watch him step through this process. He goes step by step, so you can kind of follow along if you want to try this yourself. Manoj from the Azure Data Explorer team talked about using Apache Spark for Azure Synapse Analytics. This was a great one as well. Might have been one of the top viewed ones of this month. And then Mohammed came on. We basically released a new data migration website. So maybe y'all were familiar with the old website that we had, but we've revamped it, updated everything, added some videos, added some customer stories. And so Mohammed walks through how you can get the most out of these data migration guides. Now on the live front, so similar to what you're seeing here, we stream every Wednesday, not just once a month, but every Wednesday at 9 a.m. We talked about something old, something new. This is a show I do with Buck Woody where we talk about data science topics. This one was really interesting. We talked about classification and how you can do that with different services and even the math behind it. So that's a good one. And then the Azure SQL Security Series is another mini series we're running as part of Data Exposed Live. We're going to go through various topics related to Azure SQL Security. This one was really great. We had Mirek and Andreas from the security team go through access and authentication. I learned a ton. So I would definitely recommend checking that one out as well. And finally, we had a fun one. I say fun, it's always interesting to have Buck Woody and Bob Ward on the show at the same time. And that's what we did for the Ask the Expert session. We had a lot of interesting questions, questions like, is SQL Server dead? And questions also about Buck that were not related to Azure SQL at all. But, you know, that's what happens when you get Buck and Bob on the same show. So that's what was happening with Data Exposed. If you want to subscribe to our YouTube channel in that top right link, that's how you can stay up to date on what we're doing and what we're posting. Now let's get into some of the blogs. Now on the SQL Server Tech Community blogs, a lot of updates around SQL Server as well as the Data SQL client. A few things I wanted to comment on. The inference of ML models in SQL Server for external languages. This one's really interesting because what it allows you to do is basically import models from other places. So, you know, you might have a PyTorch or a TensorFlow or even an sklearn model that you want to import. And the way we're allowing you to do this is through Onyx. So Onyx is this kind of open source way of interpreting models. And so now we have support in SQL Server to actually import and recognize Onyx models. So you can train models somewhere else using some other tool and then bring them into SQL Server very easily. So that was an interesting one that I'll have to play with and hopefully we'll get to cover in something old, something new in the coming months. Another one I wanted to call out is the Microsoft.data.sql client library. This one's really cool because what we've decided is we're basically going to do 2 GAs a year. And in between the GAs, we're going to do these preview launches. And so this is the second preview. The biggest thing in this release, or even in preview 1 and preview 2, is this idea of configurable retry logic that we're just building in for you. So this is a big thing when you move to Azure SQL. So it's cool to see that we're just kind of doing a lot of that for you. Okay, so yeah, lots of updates on SQL Server. Definitely recommend checking those out. CU10 was released, so you might want to check it out, how it relates to SQL Server 2019, as well as big data clusters if you're using it. On to the Azure SQL blog, just a few things to mention. Again, you can go deeper into that hyperscale preview I demoed earlier about geo-replication. You can also learn about cross-instance DTC with Azure SQL Managed Instance. We're really trying to make this easier, and we're listening to your feedback, and we're implementing it as fast as we can. So that's an interesting blog post to kind of learn more about what we're doing and how you can use it and take advantage of it, and how you can also submit feedback. The third one was this new T-SQL functionality, and I don't think this is something we do very frequently, so I thought it was pretty interesting. The greatest and least SQL function. So when I first saw this, I was like, well, we already have minimum and maximum. What would I need this for? So I want to show you a quick demo because I went and played with it. So here I am in SSMS, and what you can see is I'm basically able to specify multiple columns or multiple items, and it's going to pick in each row of the table, it's going to pick the greatest value of each of those options. And similarly, we have a least functionality as well. So we're going to be able to pick the one with the highest or lowest values using this new functionality. So if we take a look at it and just try to understand what it's doing, in this one, we're looking at unit price, extended amount, and product standard cost. So you can see unit price, extended amount, and product standard cost, and then we're seeing the greatest price. So you can see it's comparing all these and saying that 2024-994 is the greatest price. And just similarly, if we were comparing tax and freight, we're going to pick the lowest cost there, and you can see it's also picking the lowest there. So pretty simple in what it's doing, but before there was some complicated T-SQL you had to run. It wasn't actually as simple as just saying least or greatest. So this is pretty cool functionality to me. I chatted with one of the engineers, and I was just really excited about the quote because he wrote this blog and he explained some of the scenarios. And the quote he put in this at the bottom was, providing the greatest developer experience in Azure is the least we can do. And as someone who just loves puns, I just thought this was brilliant. I laughed to myself, by myself, and so I thought maybe you guys would enjoy it as well. But that's from John Steen, the software engineer that actually worked on this capability. So that's Azure SQL Tech Community. We also have an Azure Database Support blog. So this is basically members of our support team. They blog about certain things that they see. So I'm just going to pull all these up there. I think that's all of them. So these are all the blogs that they release. There's this one guy who does these lessons learned. So he has a case that he finds interesting and he'll actually blog about it. And so you'll see he's up on 170. He's got a bunch of different ones that he's done. So you can learn about bulk insert using Python and Azure SQL. He actually learned in this that, you know, Python isn't necessarily always the fastest way to go about this. So that was a pretty interesting one. Let's see, what else did I read about? Oh, Azure SQL DB and Managed Instance, TimpDB. This article was super interesting. It basically summarizes and kind of reminds, serves as a refresher to how TimpDB works in DB and MI. It explains you the limits and even the different queries you can use to try to monitor and understand what's going on, the different error messages that you see when compared to SQL Server, and tips on how to address each of those errors. So I think this is a good review or learning exercise for everyone to review. I learned a few things that I had forgotten, so I definitely recommend that one as well. A few other things, you know, like for example, if you've ever faced this error of revocation of the SSL certificate when you're using AAD auth, this step-by-step walks by how to address that very specific issue. So this is one of the cool things about the Azure Database Support blog. Now, one thing I did do from here is this one on how to auto-scale Azure SQL databases. In a previous episode of Data Exposed a while back, we might have talked about this auto-scaling functionality for Hyperscale, which we've released on GitHub, and I can find that link and add it to the blog. But this one is using Azure Automation, and that's something I hadn't played with a ton, so I actually wanted to step through this blog post. So let me switch back again to my browser and show you. So basically in the blog post, if I could speak, basically in the blog post, the writer goes through how to configure this. So I went step by step through their instructions and was able to pretty easily set this up. So what you see is I have a SQL database on a server. It's general purpose 2V core, so it's the lowest cores it can be at this moment. And what I was basically able to do is create an alert. So down at the bottom, you can see I have some alerts, and hopefully it will load and you'll be able to see my alerts in the past 24 hours. You can see this one alert is informational. So this is an alert that I set up through the process of following along this blog. And we can see what the alert is called. It's called CPU is high, so we're scaling up. So basically what happens is you can see I triggered this a few times just to see how it works. And you can change the threshold. In the article, they set the threshold to 85%, but just for demo purposes, I set it to 50%. So you can see that every time we went above a threshold, then this alert was triggered. So you can see that the alert's triggered, then we go down. We're not using high CPU utilization. And then if I want to see more about this, I can go into the alert rule. So what this is going to load up is, again, something I built using the blog post. So let's see, it's loading, but it was really easy to follow the instructions, and this is actually some cool capabilities. I haven't done a lot with alerting. Really easy to set up this alert. You can see the hierarchy of what I'm monitoring, what I'm setting up here, what the condition is. So like I said, I set the condition to whenever the max CPU percentage is greater than 50%, I want to go ahead and scale up my database. And so that's the condition, and then I can set different actions. So the first action is this, well, I guess there's only one action. It's the scaling action group. So you can see it contains a few actions. What you can see is it contains a notification action. So basically I set up an email to be sent when this alert happens. I want to get an email and say, hey, CPU utilization is high. We're going to scale up your database. And then I also have this automation runbook. And so this automation runbook, this one is based on a PowerShell script, but it's basically going to use this to scale me up to the next tier. So it's going to go, I think it goes from 2 vCore to 4 vCore, and it will scale up accordingly if I continue to overdo or overhit that CPU utilization of a max of 50%. This is a pretty cool one. I do want to mention there's also a GitHub sample that will actually do this for you as well. But, you know, it's nice to have options, and people have different things that they like to use, whether it's open source code or setting up Azure automation. So that's another really cool one as well. So again, just to kind of wrap up the blogs and videos, there's always a ton of blogs and videos coming up. Yeah, I was just taking a look at the comments. Looks like some people have had some issues with freezing. Hopefully everyone's able to see okay. We will post the on-demand, so if you do have issues, you can always come back and watch them later. Now I'm excited because we're kind of announcing a new segment, which we're going to be doing hopefully on a monthly basis. And this segment is called SQL in a Minute. So for that, I'm going to bring on the lead for that, Cheryl. Cheryl, thanks so much for joining us today. We're so excited to have you. Can you tell folks a little bit about you and also like what we're trying to do with SQL in a Minute?
Well, you know, and thank you so much for having me. It's a great opportunity to bring some focus to content that we use every day. SQL Docs has such a large repository, and we use it frequently for development, for learning. Some even use it for teaching. So my hope is to bring that light to that space and really talk about how you can benefit and leverage the documentation that we create.
Awesome. Wonderful. Well, I'm just so excited to have you on the show. And I know you have another guest, Jason. So I'll go ahead and bring Jason up. Jason, can you tell us a little bit about your role as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Anna. I'm Jason Roth. I'm the manager of the SQL Docs team. And we publish content to docs.microsoft.com for SQL Server, Azure SQL, and Azure Synapse Analytics, and partner closely with the product team and to try to make sure that we get the right docs out for all of you customers.
Awesome. Great. Well, I'll pass it over to y'all to tell us about what's new in SQL in a Minute.
Thank you so much. You know, I want to welcome everyone to our first segment here. Today, you're going to get a virtual backstage pass to the SQL Docs team, where we publish and update SQL-related content, articles every month. We look forward to continuing to share important updates to SQL. Today, I want to welcome again Jason Roth, our SQL Docs team manager. Good morning, Jason. How are you?
Good morning, Cheryl. I'm doing great.
Well, let's get started. I know we spoke a little bit already, but let's talk a little bit more about yourself and about the SQL Docs team.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I said, we have a talented team of content developers, and we try to manage a very large set of SQL Server content and Azure SQL and Azure Synapse Analytics content to produce the best content to help customers use the latest features of SQL.
You know, I'm aware that we have such a large repository of content in the SQL repo. In fact, one of the largest at Microsoft. Can you share some of the tips you might have for maybe navigating that content?
Sure. So I've got the docs.microsoft.com hub page up here. If I click on SQL Server, we'll get to the SQL Hub, and then I'll go to the on-premises documentation. So our on-premises documentation has evolved over decades to cover about 15,000 topics, and that's a lot of content, and it's a lot of different versions of SQL. So one tip I have is that if you're working in a previous version of SQL, you can get to archived versions of our documentation, both offline and online. But we also, starting in 2016, have started managing a current content set. And so not everybody may realize that there's this version dropdown up here. And I'm just going to illustrate that briefly. If we go to a topic in Linux, for example, and we say, like, how do I install SQL Server on Red Hat? The default is going to be SQL Server 2019. But let's say that you want to run 2017 on Red Hat. This particular article has been versioned. So if I drop down the version dropdown and I select SQL Server 2017, we'll see that the context of the article changes to 2017, and also the instructions change to 2017. And now most articles haven't been versioned because they might apply to all of the versions 2016 and up. But there's certain articles that do change when you change the version, and it's important to kind of understand that mechanism.
Well, those are all really great points. And I really want to focus on just the environment that we work in. One of the things that I really appreciate about Microsoft in the Docs team is our effort to raise awareness with our open source model of documentation. Can you share a little bit more about how people become part of our community?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me go to Azure SQL this time. And let's say you're in the Azure SQL documentation in the create database, single database. If you saw an error on this page, you might not realize that this is open source documentation, and you can contribute and become one of the contributors on the tagline up here. You just have to click edit at the top of the page, and then sign into GitHub, and then you're able to click the pencil icon to edit this article in Markdown. If you make the change that you see that you want to propose to the Docs team and click Propose Change at the bottom, in this case, it's making me sign in again. It will go ahead and bring up a screen that lets you review your change and create a pull request. And that kind of change goes directly to the Docs team for review, and we talk to the product team and make sure that that's something that we want to publish. But this is a way for us to scale and have all of you experts out in the community make our docs better. And with so many topics, you guys are the experts, and we want that kind of feedback. There's also a feedback mechanism at the bottom of the article that you can do general feedback, product, and article. But we have just wanted to let everybody know, we have a roadshow that we've been giving to different SQL user groups and conferences where we go through this process in more detail, kind of talk about behind the scenes, give you tips on how to contribute. And if you're interested in giving that, we'd love to give that to your user group in the community.
I've had the opportunity to moderate one of these sessions about becoming a contributor, and it does an excellent job on explaining how to create your first pull request to contribute to the Docs team. It's a definite must-see. One of the biggest pluses for me is the community engagement. During the time that we're giving this presentation, there's an open space for questions, and people can pose some of the questions they have about making that first pull request. It seems like you presented a lot of good information. What are some other options for reaching out and connecting with the Docs team?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me bring up the next slide. If you want to reach out to us, you can definitely contact us on Twitter at SQL Docs, but we also have an email alias that you could reach us at, sqldocs@microsoft.com. For example, if you wanted to talk about that presentation I mentioned. But one of the main ways, and the best ways of getting in touch with us is to make those public pull requests and issue feedback at the bottom of the article. And that comes straight to us, and then we can engage with you on your specific feedback items. These two AKA links provide a link to the documentation and the contributors guide that talks a little bit about how to contribute to the SQL Docs. So both of those could come in handy as well. So thank you.
Well, and I appreciate all of this information. This is wonderful and great. That about wraps our segment up, and I'm sure you'll find all of these resources very helpful. I want to thank Jason for stopping by this morning and laying the foundation that we will be speaking about, which is SQL Docs. I also want to give a personal shout out to Galaxy Muffin 16 for that wonderful piece of artwork that she put together. I want to make this a personal invitation to you to become part of our community by making a contribution to our docs. We look forward to hearing from you. Take care and be well. Back to you, Anna.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And thank you both for being on the show. I think the docs is such a crucial part of everything that anyone does on our platform or in Azure or just in general. So really appreciate y'all being on the show, and we're looking forward to future months' updates.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So moving on to our next segment, we have Marisa Brasile, who is going to come on and talk to us about our upcoming events. Now, if you all haven't met Marisa before, just an FYI, she is the producer and the machine behind this show. So if you ever see her, be sure to thank her if you like the show. If you don't like the show too. But
that.
Marisa takes it all. We're just so lucky to have you, Marisa, but I'll pass it over to you to talk about upcoming events.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. And this show is great. And if you do seriously have any feedback, we appreciate it, and we will take it, and we will take it into consideration. So thanks all. So events. So there's a lot going on this month for events. The Azure Data team is super busy this month. So the first one up is next Tuesday on May 10th. It's called SQL. It's actually Monday. It starts Monday and Tuesday. It's May 10th at SQL Day 2021. And that's a Poland event with the data community. And we have a bunch of sessions there. I know Anna's actually doing a pre-con there. We have a keynote from Bob Ward, and Buck Woody and Bob Ward are also doing sessions there. On May 11th, there's the Azure webinar series, Debugging Web Apps on Azure SQL App Service and Azure SQL. On May 14th, there's PyCon 2021. We have a session we're presenting there. On May 15th and May, actually 2 Saturdays and 2 keynotes, Buck is doing at Data Weekender and Data Saturday Southwest. On May 18th, we have the Redgate Azure SQL Managed Instance webinar. Bob Ward is presenting Inside Azure SQL Managed Instance. On May 18th, there's Techorama. Julie's actually doing a session there about notebooks. On May 20th, we have the Azure SQL webinar series, another one. This one is about implementing DevOps best practices on Azure SQL. And then on May 25th through the 27th, there is Microsoft Build, which is a huge event for Microsoft. We actually have a few speakers from our team presenting there, including Anna. But we have a keynote there. We're doing 2 roundtable sessions, and we're also doing a Learn live session, and that's with Anna Hoffman and Davide Mare, and they're doing a session on build full stack applications with Azure Static Web Apps and Azure SQL Database. So the fun thing about that is one module of their learning path that they're also launching at Microsoft Build. So you're kind of getting a sneak peek by attending that session, what you can expect in that learning path that's also launching on May 25th. And we'll share more about that later. In addition to these upcoming events, we have the schedule for Data Exposed Live that's coming up this month. Next Wednesday, there is another episode in the Azure SQL Virtual Reimagined series with David Pless and Pam. And on May 19th, we're doing a deep dive about Azure SQL Insights with Elaine. So lots coming up this month. If you want to register or learn more about any of these events and where we're speaking at, that will be in the blog post that Anna launched today as well. And
awesome.
Give it back to you, Anna. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Marisa. Just a follow up there. Did you say Buck is double keynoting on the same day on May 15th?
Buck can do so many, wonderful things. I don't know how he's going to be in 2 places at once, but he's doing it. So, yeah. That.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Marisa. Of course, definitely check out some of these events. I'm looking forward to seeing how Buck is in 2 places at once. But in this virtual world, I guess anything is possible. Moving on, we're going to talk about our monthly Microsoft Learn module of the month. Basically, during this segment, I highlight a different module in Microsoft Learn that I found interesting or that I was a part of creating. So there is some bias here, but it's always going to be related to Azure SQL. So this one, I think, is a very interesting one. This one is about availability in Azure SQL Database and Azure SQL Managed Instance. When you talk to a lot of people about moving from on-prem to Azure SQL Platform as a Service, the high availability that you get built in with Azure SQL is a lot of things that people talk about. So this is a great way to get hands-on. Just to show you a brief glimpse. And I'm sorry, this is in dark mode right now. I forgot to change it. But basically, this is part of the Azure SQL Fundamentals learning path. You've heard me talk about this many times before. We've had lots of people go through this learning path and then pass DP300. So definitely leverage this. One of the greatest things about it is if we go into this module, for example, the highly available one, They have exercises in all of them, and these exercises have built-in sandboxes. So basically, as long as you sign in, which I'm not right now, but as long as you sign in and accept the permissions, you can actually get 4-hour increments of free Azure resources. So you can play with all this stuff for free. For example, we have exercises on point-in-time restore or picture. We also have general purpose HA and business critical HA exercises where you can see how fast failovers can be in Azure SQL. You're also going to learn about the architectures underneath of each of these service tiers. So that's something you'll get to learn about, which is really interesting, especially if you're coming from a SQL Server background. You'll learn about auto failover groups and geo-replication, which is something you kind of learned about in the with the Hyperscale announcement that I demoed at the beginning of the show, and we'll also talk about availability. So this is a great resource. Please use it. Please share it. Give us feedback. You can give us feedback very similarly to how you give feedback in the documentation. And let's see, the other thing I wanted to highlight is my pick of the month. So every month I go and I pick something and I choose to highlight it. And today I want to highlight the Innovate Today with Azure SQL Digital event. This actually happened yesterday. May the 4th be with you. But what it was this great event. Let me just pull it up, where we pulled on some really big players like Rohan Kumar, Bob Ward. I had the honor of doing a demo there. But there were also like 6 on-demand or 8 on-demand demos by Microsoft MVPs, by program managers on the team, as well as some customer videos, which were really interesting. I just watched the Komatsu one again before this. It's really cool. So if you register now, you can still get everything just in the on-demand form. We also did get a Scott Guthrie cameo in this. So a little spoiler, but you know, it's already happened. So I don't feel that bad doing that. But yeah, this is my pick of the month. If you want that on-demand access, you can go to the Azure SQL Digital event URL, which I will also share in my blog that is already live. And then the other thing I wanted to call out, which Marisa kind of talked about, is at Build, we are working on a new learning path. I'm really excited about it. It's about building serverless full stack applications in Azure. We have been showing the solution or the scenario off in various platforms already. So maybe you've seen some things about the catching the bus sample. But basically, this is a great way to learn about Azure services, how Azure SQL Database plays into all these services, and how you can use things like Azure Static Web Apps, Azure SQL Database Serverless, Azure Functions, Azure Logic Apps, GitHub Actions for CI/CD and DevOps, and more tools like Visual Studio Code, Azure Data Studio. This is something I'm really excited about. Again, a little bit of bias here, but I'm very excited about it. It's launching at Build, and we're launching it with a Learn Live session. So if you register for Build, you can register for our Learn Live session, where you'll get a glimpse at one of the modules in this learning path. So very excited about that as well. With that, we are about at the top of the hour. So I wanted to just make a plug for aka.ms/news update. You've heard from a lot of people, you've learned a lot of things, and maybe you want to look into some things around SSMA, especially with regards to Oracle migrations or other types of migrations, or you want to learn more about Citus 10, or you want to learn more about the docs and how you can contribute, or play with any of the demos that I did from various blog posts. Then this is the one URL for you to go to, because this is going to have all those references. Everything we talked about today is summarized there. So we encourage you to check out the news update URL. You can also comment on that if you have questions about any updates. You can also comment or like this video, depending on how you feel about it. With that, I want to thank you all for joining us again for this episode of Data Exposed Live. And really, we hope to see you next time on Data Exposed.